The alien princess asked me to act as her husband, just to board the ship. Jake had never planned on getting involved in alien politics. He was just a trader, a simple human trying to make a living in the chaotic expanse of space. He had no interest in the struggles of powerful alien factions, and he certainly didn't expect to be caught up in one of their wars. But that's exactly what happened when he found himself stranded on the desolate planet of Xyler. The planet had been a haven for smugglers and outcasts for years, and it was far from any major space routes. Jake's ship had been damaged during an unexpected storm while traveling through the region, and now he was stuck, with no way to communicate with anyone and no way to fix his ship. On the third day of his stay, while walking through a market in the heart of the city, Jake spotted a woman being escorted by two heavily armed bodyguards. She was stunning, even for an alien, with sharp features, long silver hair, and eyes that seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow. There was something regal about her, something that commanded attention even in a crowd of rough-looking traders and smugglers. Without thinking, Jake stepped aside to let her pass, but as she got closer, she glanced at him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was something about her gaze that seemed to pull him in. It was a strange feeling, but it didn't last long. The moment passed, and the woman continued on her way. That was when everything changed. The next day, Jake was sitting in the small cafe he frequented, nursing a mug of coffee and trying to figure out his next move when the same woman entered. This time, she wasn't with her bodyguards. She approached him directly, her eyes locked onto his with the same intensity as before. "Are you Jake Kavanaugh?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, with a strange accent that Jake couldn't quite place. Jake stared at her, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, that's me. Do I know you?" The woman smiled, though there was a certain sadness in her eyes. "You don't, but I know you. I've been watching you for a while." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "You've been watching me?" "I don't even know who you are." "My name is Princess Aurelia of the Surian Empire," she said, her voice steady. "I need your help, and I believe you can assist me." Jake's eyes widened in surprise. He had heard of the Surian Empire before. It was one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, but he had never thought that a member of the royal family would end up on a planet like this. "Why would I help you?" Jake asked, still uncertain about the situation. Aurelia sighed, her gaze softening. "Because right now I need to get off this planet, and there's only one way to do that. I need to board a diplomatic ship headed for a neutral system, but the only way I can do that is if I'm married. I'm being hunted and I need to get away from here." Jake didn't fully understand. "Married? You want me to act as your husband?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I'm being pursued by enemies and I need to escape. You're the only one who can help me." "They won't look for a married woman, especially if she's with her husband. All I need is for you to act as my husband long enough to get aboard the ship. Once we're off this planet, I'll be safe." Jake stared at her in disbelief. It was a ridiculous request. He had no idea who she was beyond the fact that she was a princess, and he certainly had no desire to get entangled in whatever mess she had found herself in. But there was something about the urgency in her voice that made him hesitate. "You're serious, aren't you?" Jake said, his voice quieter now. "Yes," Aurelia replied without hesitation. "I wouldn't ask you if I didn't have to. My life depends on this, please." Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to process what she had just said. He had never been a hero, and he certainly wasn't looking to start now. But the way she spoke, the desperation in her voice, it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could help. He sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. "All right, I'll do it, but I need some answers first." "What's going on? Why are you being hunted?" Aurelia's expression darkened slightly, but she kept her composure. "My family has enemies. There are those who want me dead because I'm the last remaining heir to the throne of the Surian Empire. I was supposed to marry into another powerful family, but I refused. That refusal has made me a target." Jake nodded slowly. It made sense now, at least in part. "And you think this ship, this diplomatic mission, will get you to safety?" "I do," she said, nodding firmly. "But only if you agree to help me." Jake looked at her, studying her carefully. She wasn't like the other nobles he had heard about. She wasn't playing some political game. There was real fear in her eyes and a hint of something else, a vulnerability that surprised him. "All right, I'm in," he said. "But we do this my way. I'm not some fool you can boss around. We'll act the part, but I'll make sure we both get out of this in one piece." A faint smile touched Aurelia's lips, and for a moment she looked almost relieved. "Thank you, Jake." "You have no idea what this means to me." He leaned forward, extending his hand to her. "Let's get to work then." As their hands met, Jake had no idea what he was getting himself into. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The next few days were a blur for Jake. The plan was simple enough. Get on the diplomatic ship, pretend to be Princess Aralia's husband, and get off the planet. But simple didn't mean easy. He had to go along with her story, play the role of someone he wasn't, and pretend to be someone who could protect her. And all this while, he barely knew who she really was or what her enemies were capable of. They met in the same cafe each day, and it quickly became their base of operations. Aralia explained more about the situation as time went on. She wasn't just a runaway princess. She was the last heir to a powerful empire that was on the verge of collapse. Her family had been overthrown in a coup, and now there were only a few factions left in the galaxy that still wanted her alive. Not because they cared for her, but because of the political power she represented. Jake found it hard to wrap his mind around the idea that the beautiful, calm woman sitting across from him was a target of assassination. She didn't look like someone who was running for her life. She looked like a woman who had everything she could ever need, someone who was above such worries. But he could see it in her eyes. She was desperate, and everything she had once known was slipping away from her. "Where do we start?" Jake asked, sitting up straighter in his chair, trying to focus on their mission. "First, we need to get to the ship," Aralia said. "It leaves at dawn. We'll board under the guise of a newlywed couple. No one will suspect anything." Jake couldn't help but laugh nervously. "Right, newlyweds, this is going to be awkward." Aralia gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know it won't be easy, but it's the only way. If we don't succeed, I'll be dead before the week is over." Jake thought about that for a moment. He wasn't in the habit of taking risks, especially not for strangers, especially not for royalty. But there was something about Aralia that made him want to help. He had no family to speak of, no connections that could help him in the galaxy. But somehow he felt like this was something he could do, something he had to do. The plan, as simple as it was, took more preparation than Jake had imagined. The ship they were boarding wasn't just any cargo vessel. It was a diplomatic ship, heavily guarded and full of alien officials from different planets. The kind of ship where, if the wrong person noticed them, it could all be over in an instant. The night before their departure, Jake and Aralia sat together in her small room at the local inn. The place wasn't much: rough wooden walls, creaky floors, and a single bed that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. But it would have to do. They had no time for anything better. "So what's the plan when we're on the ship?" Jake asked, looking out the small window at the dark sky. "Do we just walk in and sit down, act like we're the perfect couple?" Aralia nodded. "That's exactly it. I'll handle the diplomatic side of things. You just need to look like my husband. We'll be on the ship for several days before we reach the neutral planet where we can disappear." Jake sighed. "And what happens if someone recognizes you? What happens if they figure out who you are?" "We keep up the act," Aralia replied, her voice steady. "If anyone questions us, we stick to the story. I've been trained in diplomacy and deception my whole life. It's all about convincing them that we're telling the truth." "But you," she paused and looked at him with a sharp gaze. "You need to be convincing too. Your role is just as important as mine." Jake wasn't sure how convincing he could be. He wasn't a liar by nature, but he had no choice now. He had agreed to this, and there was no turning back. He had to play the part. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Jake and Aralia made their way to the docks. The air was thick with the scent of metal and engine fuel, and the sound of ships taking off echoed in the distance. Aralia led him to a small transport ship, where they would meet the crew of the diplomatic vessel. When they boarded, Jake felt out of place. The ship was luxurious, decorated with ornate alien designs that made him feel like an outsider. But Aralia didn't seem fazed. She was a queen in her own right, even if she no longer had the crown to prove it. A steward led them to their quarters, small but comfortable enough for the journey. There were no windows, just soft blue lights and sleek white walls. Everything about the ship screamed authority, from the polished floors to the uniforms worn by the crew. Jake and Aralia were given identical outfits, a simple but elegant robe for her and a formal suit for him. The plan was set, and all they had to do now was blend in. As they entered the main hall for the first meal of the journey, Aralia whispered to Jake, "Remember, we're a newlywed couple. We're here for the journey and we don't want to attract attention." Jake nodded, but his stomach was in knots. They walked together into the dining area where several other passengers were already seated. Aurelia gave a friendly smile to the captain as they passed, but Jake's eyes darted nervously around the room, unsure of what to expect. He had no idea how to act like a husband, not to a princess, not to anyone. "Just relax," Aurelia said quietly, noticing his discomfort. "We'll be fine." Jake wasn't so sure. The room was filled with dignitaries, some of whom were already eyeing them with interest. He had to play it cool, had to stay calm and look like he belonged. But it wasn't easy. The truth was, he felt like an imposter. He wasn't married to Aurelia, and he wasn't a diplomat. He was just a human trying to survive in a galaxy full of powerful beings, and the weight of that felt heavier than ever. But as the meal went on and Aurelia spoke with the other passengers, Jake began to settle into the role. He was still unsure of himself, but he could see how confident Aurelia was. She wasn't afraid of these people. She knew how to navigate their world. He just had to follow her lead. The evening passed quietly, and the ship set off into the vast unknown. Jake had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time since meeting Aurelia, he felt like he might be part of something bigger than himself. Something important. But no matter how hard he tried to settle into the role of husband, one thought lingered in his mind. What if they didn't make it? What if, despite all their planning, they were caught before they could reach safety? Jake didn't know the answer, but as the ship soared through the stars, he knew one thing for sure. He was in this for the long haul, and whatever happened next, he would be there for Aurelia. Because no matter how strange it all seemed, he had promised to protect her, and he wasn't going to back down now. The first few days aboard the diplomatic ship passed quietly. Jake kept his head down, staying close to Aurelia as they navigated through the routines of life on board. His role as her husband was strange, but he managed to play along. They shared meals, walked the halls together, and even attended diplomatic gatherings as a married couple. For the most part, no one seemed to suspect that anything was wrong. Everyone was too busy with their own affairs, and as far as they were concerned, Jake and Aurelia were just another royal couple traveling for political reasons. But every time Jake caught Aurelia's eye, there was a flicker of something more, a silent understanding between them that this wasn't just a game anymore. It had started as an act, a simple deception, but over time, Jake found himself thinking of her differently. She was no longer just the princess in distress, but someone he couldn't help but care about. One afternoon, as they walked through the quiet halls of the ship, Aurelia spoke to Jake for the first time about her past. "My family was once everything. The Surian Empire ruled over vast stretches of the galaxy, and we were respected. I had everything I could ever want." Jake glanced at her, noticing the sadness in her eyes. He had always seen her as calm and composed, but now, with her walls down for a moment, she seemed vulnerable. "But then, my cousin, he took it all," she continued, her voice low. "He was always hungry for power, always looking for ways to take control. He staged a coup and killed my father. Now my mother and my brother are dead, and I'm the only one left." Jake's heart sank. He had known that Aurelia was in danger, but hearing her speak of her family's betrayal hit him harder than he expected. She had lost everything, and now she was alone, trying to survive in a galaxy that no longer cared for her. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly, unsure of what else to say. Aurelia smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't have to apologize. It's just the way things are now, and I'm doing what I can to survive." They continued walking, the silence between them heavy but comfortable. Jake couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration for her. She had been through so much, yet she carried herself with a dignity that most people, even with all their power, couldn't match. Later that day, they were invited to a formal dinner with the ship's captain and several other passengers. Jake felt out of place as he sat at the table, surrounded by dignitaries from all over the galaxy. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. But Aurelia was at ease, talking to the captain with the kind of confidence he had never seen in anyone before. She was a natural, always calm and collected, able to navigate conversations with ease. Jake admired her for it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The captain, a tall alien with green skin and sharp features, leaned toward Aurelia during the meal. "Princess, we've heard rumors of unrest in your home system," he said, his voice low but laced with curiosity. "What are your plans when we reach the neutral zone? Will you be seeking asylum?" Jake's heart raced at the mention of her past. He knew this wasn't just a casual conversation. The captain knew who she was, he had to, but Aralia didn't seem fazed. She smiled, her eyes steady as she responded. "We'll see what happens when we reach the neutral zone," she said diplomatically. "But for now, I'm just enjoying the journey." Jake watched the exchange closely, noting the way the captain's eyes lingered on her. There was something calculating about him. The man wasn't just asking questions out of politeness. He was trying to get information. And Aralia knew it, but she didn't let it show. She answered every question with poise, never revealing more than she needed to. After the dinner, Jake and Aralia returned to their quarters. Aralia seemed lost in thought, her expression distant. Jake couldn't help but ask, "Do you think the captain knows who you really are?" he asked, his voice careful. Aralia paused, then sighed. "I don't know, but I suspect he does. He's been too interested in my past, asking too many questions. I have to be careful. People like him will always be looking for an opportunity to use someone like me." Jake nodded. He had learned quickly that the galaxy wasn't a place for the weak or naive. Everyone had their own agenda, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. But for some reason, he felt like Aralia had earned his trust. Despite everything, despite the lies, he wanted to help her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was because he couldn't stand the thought of her being alone in all of this. Or maybe it was because, somewhere along the way, he had come to care for her in ways he hadn't expected. That night, as they prepared for bed, Jake sat on the edge of his cot, his mind racing. He had been a mercenary once, used to danger, used to deception. But this was different. He had never been this close to someone like Aralia, someone with so much at stake, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for whatever might come next. "I don't trust the captain," Aralia said suddenly, breaking his thoughts. "Something feels wrong." "I think we're being watched." Jake looked at her, his heart pounding. "Do you think they know about you?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "But I can't risk it. We have to be more careful from now on. If anyone finds out who I really am, we're both dead." Jake stood up, walking over to her. "We'll stick together. We'll get through this." Aralia gave him a faint smile, but it was tinged with worry. "I hope so, but I'm not sure how much longer we can keep up this charade. The longer we stay on this ship, the greater the chance someone will figure out who I really am." Jake nodded. He understood the stakes. They had to make it to the neutral zone, where they could disappear and start a new life. But with each passing day, it felt more and more like time was running out. The next morning, the tension on board the ship only grew. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Every time he turned a corner, he felt eyes on him. He knew Aralia was right. They were being watched, and it wasn't just the captain who was keeping an eye on them. There were other passengers who seemed too interested in their every move, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Jake couldn't figure it out, but he knew they had to act fast. That afternoon, Jake and Aralia were called to the bridge. The captain wanted to speak with them privately. Jake's gut instinct told him this wasn't going to be a friendly chat, but there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, they had to face it together. The tension was unbearable as Jake and Aralia stepped onto the bridge. The captain was standing at the center, flanked by a few of his officers. His green skin glistened under the soft lights, and his sharp eyes tracked their every movement as they entered. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a casual conversation. It felt like something was about to change. "Princess, Mr. Kavanaugh," the captain said with a polite but cold smile. "Please have a seat." Jake sat down next to Aralia, trying to keep his face neutral, but inside his heart was racing. He had no idea what this was about, but something told him it wasn't good. "I've been reviewing the ship's logs," the captain continued, folding his hands in front of him. "There are some inconsistencies. It seems there are rumors circulating about your true identity, Princess Aralia." Aralia's face remained calm, though Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. She was trying to hide it, but he knew her better than that now. She wasn't fooling anyone, least of all the captain. "I don't know what you're talking about," Aralia replied smoothly. "We've been on the ship for several days now without incident. I'm just here to get to the neutral zone." The captain leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Princess, but these rumors, they're not just rumors. Some of the passengers on board have connections that could make things complicated." Jake's stomach twisted. This was worse than he had imagined. They weren't just being watched by the captain, they were being watched by others on the ship too. "You'll have to forgive me if I don't take these rumors lightly," the captain said, his voice growing colder. "Your family's political enemies aren't far behind. I'm sure you're aware of that." Jake couldn't keep quiet any longer. What are you getting at? Are you trying to say we're in danger? The captain looked at him for a long moment, then sighed, sitting back in his chair. I'm saying that there are people on this ship who have their own agendas. If your true identity is discovered, we won't make it to the neutral zone. It will be a bloodbath. Jake clenched his fists under the table. He had known this was dangerous, but hearing it out loud made the reality hit harder. Aurelia was the last heir to a fallen empire, and there were people who would do anything to stop her from reclaiming her throne. He had known they were being hunted, but now the captain was openly talking about it. I understand your concerns, Aurelia said, her voice steady. But I've done nothing to warrant suspicion. I'm not the one who created this mess. My cousin is the one who betrayed my family, and he's the one you should be worried about. The captain nodded slowly. I agree, but you're not the only one with enemies. We all have our share of them. And some of these passengers, well, they have a way of making things disappear. Jake's mind raced. So what now? What are we supposed to do? The captain looked at him, his expression unreadable. I suggest you both remain low profile for the rest of the journey. Avoid unnecessary attention. I'll make sure to keep an eye on things from my side. If anything comes up, we'll handle it together. There was something about the captain's words that didn't sit right with Jake. He had a feeling the captain wasn't telling them everything. But what choice did they have? They were stuck on this ship, and Aurelia needed to get to the neutral zone. There was no turning back now. We'll keep our heads down, Aurelia said, standing up. Thank you for the warning, Captain. We'll be cautious. Jake stood up too, though he didn't trust the captain's words for a second. He could feel the tension in the air as they left the bridge, and he knew Aurelia felt it too. The captain was hiding something. He always was. But what? As they walked down the corridor, Jake turned to Aurelia. Do you think he's really on our side? Aurelia's face was tight with frustration. I don't know. I've learned not to trust anyone in the galaxy. The captain may seem like he's trying to help, but I think he's playing a game of his own. Jake nodded, agreeing with her. The captain was too calm, too controlled. He had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. And who else on the ship had their own plans? They weren't just surrounded by enemies. They were surrounded by people with their own agendas, people who wanted something from them. Over the next few days, Jake and Aurelia stayed in their quarters as much as possible, trying to avoid unnecessary interactions with other passengers. Aurelia had begun to make small talk with a few of the other dignitaries on board, but Jake could tell it was all part of her plan to keep up appearances. She had to play the role of a peaceful, unthreatening princess, even if it made her skin crawl. One evening, as they sat together in their quarters, Jake noticed something strange. Aurelia was sitting at the small desk, her eyes focused on a datapad, but she was holding herself stiffly. Her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was a tense energy about her. What is it? Jake asked, concerned. Aurelia looked up at him, her eyes sharp. I've been going over the ship's schematics. I noticed something. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's that? There's a sealed section of the ship right near the lower cargo hold. I've been on this ship for days now, and I've never seen anyone go near it. It doesn't even show up in the crew's logs. Jake stood up, his curiosity piqued. You think it's something important? I don't know, but I'm starting to think the captain is hiding something from us. I have a feeling we're not the only ones who have secrets on this ship. Jake's mind raced. He had suspected the captain was hiding something, but this was different. If there was something being kept from them, it could change everything. They couldn't let their guard down, not even for a moment. We need to find out what's down there, Jake said, his voice determined. Aurelia nodded, her gaze intense. We will, but we have to be careful. If we're caught, it could mean the end of everything. Jake's pulse quickened. The danger they were in was growing with each passing day. But he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever secret the captain was hiding, it was the key to understanding what was really going on. As the ship continued its journey through the stars, Jake and Aurelia knew they had to uncover the truth. Their lives and the fate of the galaxy depended on it. The days on the diplomatic ship felt like they were dragging on forever. Jake and Aurelia kept their distance from most of the other passengers, wary of anyone who might be watching them. Every time they passed someone in the hallways, Jake felt the weight of their eyes on him, but he never knew if it was suspicion or just the strange feeling of being in unfamiliar territory. What he did know was that the tension was building. Every small conversation, every glance exchanged between them and the crew made him wonder. Were they just paranoid, or was something about to happen? The secret part of the ship that Aralia had discovered lingered in Jake's mind like a shadow. He couldn't shake the feeling that the captain was involved in something much bigger than a simple political game. Aralia had been right to worry. The longer they stayed on the ship, the more it felt like the walls were closing in around them. Late one night after dinner, Aralia came to him with a new sense of urgency. "Jake, it's time. We need to investigate that sealed section." Jake stood up from the table where they had been eating in their quarters. "You're sure about this?" Aralia nodded, her face set in determination. "I can't shake the feeling that the captain's involved in something more. We need to find out what it is before we reach the neutral zone. If we wait any longer, it might be too late." They had spent the last few days planning this out carefully. The sealed section was located near the lower cargo hold, a part of the ship that was rarely accessed. Aralia had already checked the ship's schematics, and they both knew the risks. If they were caught, it would mean their end. But they couldn't ignore the possibility that whatever the captain was hiding could change everything. Jake felt his heart race as they moved quietly through the darkened hallways. The ship was mostly quiet at this hour, with most of the passengers asleep in their quarters. It was the perfect time to sneak around, but every creak of the ship's metal floors made Jake's nerves jump. They reached the door to the sealed section without encountering anyone. Aralia pulled out a small device from her pocket, a tool she had found in the ship's maintenance room days earlier. She worked quickly, her fingers moving over the device with practiced ease. Jake watched, his breath held, as the lock clicked open. The door slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a narrow hallway beyond. It smelled musty, and the air felt heavy, as if no one had been down here in years. Jake followed Aralia into the dark space, his hand on the wall to steady himself as they moved forward. They walked cautiously, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. There was no sign of anyone else. No crew members, no guards. It was as if the section had been abandoned. The deeper they went, the more Jake felt like they were uncovering a long-forgotten secret. Finally, they reached a small room at the end of the corridor. It was dimly lit, and there were crates and old equipment scattered around. But in the center of the room was a strange device. It looked like a control panel, but it wasn't like anything Jake had seen before. It was covered in alien symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. Aralia moved toward the panel, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what the captain has been hiding." Jake watched her closely as she began to examine the device. He could tell she was trying to figure out how it worked, but he didn't know enough about alien technology to understand what it was. "What is it? What does it do?" Aralia's brow furrowed. "I don't know for sure, but I think it's a communication device. A way for the captain to contact someone without the rest of the ship knowing. It's possible he's been in contact with people who want to stop me from reaching the neutral zone." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about them being hunted anymore. This was bigger than either of them had imagined. The captain wasn't just trying to keep Aralia safe. He was involved in a conspiracy that could destroy everything. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, making both of them freeze. "You shouldn't be here." Jake whipped around, his heart pounding. Standing in the doorway was the captain, his arms crossed and his eyes cold. It was like he had known they would come here all along, like he had been waiting for them. "I told you both to stay out of trouble," the captain continued, his voice low and dangerous. "But I see now that you couldn't help yourselves. You've uncovered something you shouldn't have." Jake stepped in front of Aralia, instinctively protecting her. "What is this? What are you really up to?" The captain's eyes flickered with something that could almost be called amusement. "What I'm up to is ensuring that my people stay in power, and that includes making sure certain inconvenient heirs never reach their destination." Jake felt a wave of realization wash over him. The captain had been playing both sides. He wasn't just trying to help Aralia, he had been working with her enemies all along. The captain's loyalty lay with whoever would offer him the most power. And Aralia's return to the throne was the last thing he wanted. "You're working with my cousin, aren't you?" Aralia's voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes now. "You've been planning this from the beginning." The captain didn't answer right away. He just stood there watching them. Finally, he sighed. "I didn't want it to come to this, Princess, but you've left me no choice." Jake tensed, ready to defend Aralia if things turned violent, but before he could act, the captain raised his hand. "Don't worry. I'm not here to kill you. Not yet, anyway, but you need to understand that the game has changed. Your enemies are everywhere, and I can't let you reach the neutral zone. You'll be safer if you stay out of the way." Jake didn't know what to say. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The captain, the man they had trusted, had been playing them all along. He was a traitor, and the consequences of his betrayal were far worse than either of them had imagined. "We'll see about that," Aurelia said, her voice cold. "You've made a mistake, Captain, and I'll make sure you pay for it." Before the captain could react, Aurelia moved quickly, pressing a button on the control panel. The device lit up, and a loud alarm blared through the room, sending a shockwave of panic through Jake's body. "Now we run," Aurelia said, grabbing Jake's arm. They bolted for the door, not waiting to see if the captain would stop them. As they ran through the dark corridors of the ship, Jake's mind was racing. They had uncovered the captain's betrayal, but now they had to survive. They had to make it to the neutral zone before it was too late. As they reached the main hall of the ship, Jake could hear the sound of footsteps behind them. The captain was coming after them, but they weren't going to stop now. They had come too far, and there was no turning back. Aurelia and Jake made it to the ship's docking bay, where a small shuttle was waiting for them. Without hesitation, they rushed inside, and Jake quickly powered up the controls. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, they could hear the captain's voice echoing through the ship's comm system. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You can't run from this." But Aurelia was already looking forward, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "We don't have to run anymore. We're free." As the shuttle blasted off into the vastness of space, Jake realized something. They weren't just escaping the captain, they were escaping the past. The future was theirs now, and whatever came next, they would face it together.